now. So if you missed anything or want to come back and revisit something later on, we'll be sure to post this session to our YouTube channel. And lastly, I want to say we got a small but mighty group today, but we really want to ensure that we're focusing our conversation today around who's here and who's in the room and what's relevant to you all and what you might want to hear from Nastassja about. So I have some questions I've prepared for her to answer for us, but you know, maybe I've come up with some things that aren't of particular interest to those who are here today. So I'd love, feel free, the chat is open. Feel free to raise your hand. That Zoom has that handy dandy little feature if you would rather verbalize your question. But again, just want to shape our conversation around who's here so that it can best serve you in your time. So without further ado, Nastassja Swift is a multidisciplinary artist redefining her use of portraiture through wool to create work that speaks to geographical histories, ancestry, ritual practices, and community. She is a Virginia Commonwealth University alum, holding a BFA in Printing and Printmaking and Craft and Material Studies. Nastassja is a 2023 recipient of the Center for Craft Research Fund Artist Fellowship, a VMFA Fellowship, a Dr. Doris Derby Award, an Art Matters Fellowship Award, the inaugural Black Box Press Foundation Art as Activism Grant, a Virginia Commission of the Arts Fellowship, and was nominated for the 2024 Joan Mitchell Foundation Fellowship. In 2022, she was invited as a distinguished fellow at the Penland School of Craft, and shortly after was selected for a public arts commission in Richmond, Virginia for her first large-scale public art project. Nastassja has exhibited and presented her work in institutions nationally and internationally, including VCU Qatar, Carl Friedman Gallery in the UK, Reginald F. Lewis Museum, the Virginia MoCA, to name a few. She has participated in residencies across the United States at the Vermont Studio Center, Penland School of Craft, the WISIC Project in New York, Spaces in Ohio, and Mass MoCA. Her work has been published in the Berlin publication Some Magazine, RVA Magazine, Colossal, and Arts and Culture Texas, among many others. And we are so excited to have her here. I asked her here specifically because of all of those credits I just went through. I told her earlier, I was like, I could cut some of these out, but I don't want to because it just speaks to how impressive you are and all of the experience that you can speak to in applying and receiving grants and residencies and fellowships and all the things. So I wanted to give you your flowers and thank you for being here and talking to us a little bit about your work.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Sometimes hearing those things, I'm like, oh yeah. I mean, I wrote that and then I forget that I did those things. I'm super happy to be here, and I think with that breadth of experience, I try not to hold it to myself. So with conversations with peers or oftentimes students reaching out to me, I'm always accessible and open to sharing all the different things and trial and error and how I figured it out. So thank you guys for creating a platform for me to kind of officially come and speak to those things, because I always welcome the opportunity to share that information. Um,
And I know, I'm pretty sure even since you maybe wrote this, there's been a couple others added to the list.
yes, the Textile Society of America, their Branford Elliott Award in Excellence in Fiber. I knew about it, but I couldn't publish it yet, so I couldn't put it in my bio. Um, so yeah, that is an added one to the list as of late.
All right, that's amazing. Congratulations. Um,
Thank you.
so I think Nastassja has prepared some images from some of her residencies and grant projects that she's completed. So I'm going to open the floor to her to share a little bit about her background for those who might be unfamiliar with some of the work she's accomplished. And then we'll kind of unpack a little bit about her experiences with the grants that she's received and the residencies that she's been a part of. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and share my screen so that we can get going with this PowerPoint. All right, can everyone see that okay? hopefully.
Hoping to.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. So my work, multidisciplinary has been the easiest term to use because although the process that I'm using the most is fiber-based, so I'm needle felting, which is what these masks are, the process used to create the mask that you see here. It's made of wool. I've been able to figure out how to take these wool objects off of the floor of the pedestal or the wall and figure out ways to activate them performatively or installations. And a project that I did in 2021, which is, I mean, all of my projects, I think I can say they're my favorite for a reason, but this particular project, um, it was a residency I did with a nonprofit called Spaces in Cleveland in 2021 where as we prepared for that project, or my arrival to Cleveland, I should say, I just had this dream of a parade. I was like, I want to do a parade. I don't know what goes into to facilitating something like that, but I just want to see a group of kids filled with joy and excitement and some of them wearing these masks and to have youth groups playing music and just like what does it mean for us to curate and cultivate our own joy, but to also realize that we have the power to turn that joy switch on. Like it's within us and we don't have to wait for a particular thing or moment or event to feel joy. We always have it. So I worked with several organizations outside of spaces to engage with different youth groups around the city of Cleveland. I hosted some workshops, and I think the great thing about doing this project with a residency or through a residency was the support on varying levels of like the logistics around things. And then we talk about funding. The Ohio Arts Council supported this project as well, or that residency. And it really just like alleviates some of the like details of a project that one might not want to think about or worry about or be familiar enough with to figure out. So I could just say, hey, I really want to work with a youth band. I'm not from Cleveland. I've never lived there. So, you know, having support in that way looks like, cool, Nastassja needs this. These are the organizations we're familiar with. How do we connect her? How do we facilitate this kind of engagement? What do you need beyond a conversation? And it really just like helped check the boxes to bring this project forward outside of creating the work. The talent of the students and their enthusiasm, like what are all the like behind the scenes things that like I don't always want to think about. Like I know how I want it to go. But I think this Resident Spaces was a phenomenal nonprofit support and like bringing this project to fruition and figuring out all the creative solutions to any problems that we came across. You can go to the next one. Um, and then, so I had to include her. I call her Pink Lady. Passage, When Mama Lets My Braids Fall Down My Back is a pretty popular piece of my practice. And this work wasn't necessarily supported by a grant or an award of any kind, but it was created during my time of a 9-month residency. So during the pandemic, I participated in a, I think, 5-person residency at the Contemporary Arts Network in Newport News. It was their inaugural residency. And of course, we all know 2020 was a very difficult time for a number of reasons, but isolation definitely being one of them. And a lot of creative energy came out of being isolated in a space with other artists. There were well, actually 3 painters, and now everyone's working in fiber. So I think that just goes to show like what it means to work in a space collectively and like how this creative energy kind of like transfers to other people's studio tables or spaces. Now they're quilting or adding fabrics to their tapestries, I mean their paintings. I've figured out ways to like implement some of their details into like how I'm thinking about my practice. So it was just a really beautiful time in exchange. You can go to the next one. And I like to include process photos when necessary. This studio space was chaotic at the time of me working on this project because we were all preparing for like separate opportunities. But I think that creative chaos is one of the things I enjoy about a residency because back in like my home space, or for most of us, we go back to our individual spaces or studios and residencies that have multiple artists present allow for that exchange that I talked about and to like go into a studio and I'm sitting across from Hampton Boyer, who is now based in Richmond, and behind me is Mahari Chobwera, and to the right of behind me is Asa Jackson, and you hear sewing machines going and like someone's playing music and then we're talking and it's like, hey, this pink isn't the pink I thought I would use. What do you think about it up against this blue? I need some type of like contrast. And like those conversations that are specific to this piece were ones that I got to have in that space while being in residence with other artists. You can go to the next one. So again, same residency, but this time I had received a grant from another organization. So this was the Black Box Press Inaugural Art as Activism Grant. The concluding project of my Cannes residency in Newport News was this 46-foot quilt that draped through this steel frame that measured 10 feet by 11 feet by 6 feet. Um, so the subject matter of the work was surrounding my brother's incarceration, and both the grant the granting organization and the CAN were like kind of beyond expectations of the kind of support that I could have asked for and needed. The choice for the steel sculpture to even be steel was the opportunity of having a grant and being able to find a fabricator or find someone who works in that material. And that's the beautiful thing about grants is that, without them, this might have been a wooden structure because I'm familiar with wood and I can work with wood, but that's not what the work needed. That's not what I wanted for it. So through these funding opportunities, I can say, okay, I can designate this portion to finding the person that can do exactly what I want and need. And now not only is that task off of my plate, the project gets to exist in the way that I want it to, and I can properly compensate the person. Being an artist and knowing all about poor compensation, I don't want to like facilitate that kind of activity. So it's like I try my best to make sure at the very least, the people that I collaborate with or invite into my space, I can pay them for their work and their time. And the can finding an alternative space. I really didn't want this work to be inside of a gallery with the conversation around incarceration and criminal justice and the work needed to mirror or at least feel fitting in the space that could hold those conversations. So through the CAN support, and when I say CAN, I mean Contemporary Arts Network, they worked with the city of Hampton to allow us to have access to the old Hampton City Courthouse. So that was where this work exhibited for its first month before it traveled to Texas. Um, you can go to the next one. And that's an installation shot of it in the records room, the old records room of the courthouse. And I think there's one more project after this. Yep. So can't talk with CultureWorks without showing a CultureWorks funded project. This was the first CultureWorks grant I received in 2018. It was for a project titled Remembering Her Homecoming. And that project existed as a 3.5 mile performance along Richmond's Trail of Enslaved Africans. And kind of created a short film, which, thanks to another CultureWorks recipient, Africana Film Fest, has had a life far beyond what I could have imagined for it. Anjali Moon, continues to show this work. I know she showed it at the Africana Fest they had in, um, was it Senegal for their first time this year? They were just overseas in Senegal. So yeah, and she showed it there. I think she'll show it again. Um, uh, and she's just been a great support. So like having the work exist in film and having my work have this opportunity to, show beyond the gallery space or the museum space. And like that's what I love about performance and installation and film and photography, to kind of explore these fiber sculptures that feel like my medium, but they get to live in other worlds. So I invited 8 women who had some connection to Richmond, whether they grew up here, currently lived here, had families from here, and they each wore these large felted masks that I created as this, what I call an ancestral journey, and kind of tracing the footsteps of Black womanhood in the city of Richmond. And often a few of them have called that project something that felt like a retreat. Each person was going through their own separate individual things in their lives, and like all of that energy kind of fed into this performance that we took on together. And it's still one of the masks. This is one of the last masks I have from that project. The other 7 have taken on different lives, have been repurposed for other things, but remembering her homecoming is a special project for me for a lot of reasons. So these are a few of the funded projects or projects that existed within a residency.
I just want to take a minute and look at all of them. It's just gorgeous. Thank you so much for getting this together for us and sharing a little bit more of the details that go into some of these projects. I loved when you shared about this one in particular, and shared about the one benefit of working in a residency like this being you're with people, you're with other artists, and having such a collaborative, community-driven space. I just noticed Law and Order is on the laptop. So, all
Yeah.
of the creative influence. That's awesome. Well, like I said, I have some questions here, going a little bit deeper about some of these specific aspects of working on a grant and working on a residency. But I definitely want to again just emphasize, I want to honor who's here in the room and what questions those in the room have. So if anything comes up throughout our conversation, please, please, please don't hesitate to drop it in the chat, whether that's about Nastassja's experience with a specific grant or grant writing in general, residencies in general, or maybe more about a project she's working on. That's fine too. There's space for that. So I just wanted to reiterate. So I wanted to ask, we read your bio of all these opportunities that you've been able to be a part of. And I'm sure, like with anything, the more you do it and you apply and you receive, the easier it gets. But I'm wondering if you can think back to Nastassja before she ever applied for her first one, and that time of maybe fear or anxiety around applying for something like this. And I'm wondering if you could share any advice you have for an artist who maybe has never sought out these opportunities, or thinks that they're just unsure where to start.
Yeah, I vividly remember the first because it was during the residency at VCU Qatar. And because I was an artist in residence, I was technically considered faculty. So I was able to apply for the faculty research grant. And I was extremely nervous. And I was just like, I don't know the first thing about writing a grant application. I've never in my life written a budget. It's just like, what goes into this? And I think the advice that I would give to someone who hasn't applied for one is to not try to do it on their own. I quickly realized that I needed to reach out to the network around me, and that at the time was the chair of the painting department at that campus, Reese Hemsworth. And he had under his belt, he had quite a few grants and fellowships and awards. And I was just like, Reese, I really want to do this project. It would be great to have it funded. But I don't feel confident in applying by myself. So I would go, and he carved out, I think maybe 3 or 4 sessions within that granting period. And we talked about the project. He talked about how to approach writing the project description, which I quickly realized was very different from an artist statement. And just like all of these things, like you go to college or you're taking art classes and you understand how to write about your work in a specific way. And then you realize certain opportunities call for writing about your art in other ways. And if you're not familiar with it, it just feels intimidating. So I think that the biggest piece of advice is don't try to go through it alone. You're most likely surrounded by someone who's gone through the process and like get with, asking, can we get together for coffee? Like, can I visit your studio? Or is there time that you have? Or even if there's just questions that, you're able to ask them, find the ways to feel like you have some kind of like support, or now you feel like you have the confidence to go and tackle this thing. Have other people read your application before you submit it. Everything makes sense to you because you wrote it and it's in your mind and you're like, I get it, but that's because you wrote it. So like I've always had someone else, whether it's a friend, another artist, someone who works specifically in that role, just like, hey, when you have some time, could you read over this application? That also means you can't apply at the last minute, because you can't expect someone in all of our busy lives to read an application 2 hours or a day before it's due. So there's some organization and project management that has to go into being able to even ask for help and support, because you've got to give everyone else the time and grace to be able to offer that to you. But I think those are some of the important things.
Yeah. To pivot for just a brief moment, you talking about some of those things made me remember that I hadn't brought this up yet, and it's going to be a really wonderful resource. This Wednesday, CultureWorks, in partnership with Art 180 at Art 180, is offering a 5-month or 6-month, can't remember, grant writing workshop. It meets once a month on the third Wednesday of the month from 5 to 7 o'clock. And again, we're meeting for the first time this Wednesday. And that's going to be a great opportunity, I think, for some of the things you're talking about. It's going to be a course that the group is going on together. And we're going to be walking step by step through some of these things you're talking about, crafting your artist statement versus a project description, having that person, finding someone who you can bring your work to and say, hey, what do you think? Let's check each other's stuff, and just having that also someone to hold you accountable, like, hey, we said we were going to apply for this. Where are you at with it? So if anyone here is thinking about submitting for a grant, that would be a wonderful resource for you to get involved with. You can register on Art 180's website. I want to honor some of these questions we have written here. Siani, and I apologize if I've mispronounced your name. Siani wants to know if you have any advice for emerging artists, like finding grants and residencies, or is that something that comes as you grow as an artist?
There are far more residencies that exist that I can even name in this session, or at least at the top of my head. Like there's so many different kinds of residencies, and not all of them are specific to established artists or mid-career artists. There are plenty, and actually the first residency I did was the Vermont Studio Center, and that was the August after I graduated undergrad. So I think one is like looking for the residencies that you're qualified for. There are a number of different sites. Capital One, I'm sorry, not Capital One, Creative Capital. Creative Capital, which offers their own grant. They also every month post the upcoming month and a half to 2 months of opportunities. I can't think of the actual URL, but if you go to Creative Capital or at least Google Creative Capital, you could type in November opportunities and it's on their blog. They post about all the different opportunities, grants, fellowships, awards, residencies that exist, that not that exist, that they have, that they're aware of, because they can't post all of them. But that's a great resource to kind of see what's out there. There's a couple of Instagram pages. One I think is called like Artists Alliance Communities. I might have that wrong, but I know Alliance and Artists is in there. They also just like post pretty much daily of different opportunities that come their way. Um, Something that I've done before that was suggested to me, if there's an artist that you like or follow, go to their CV on their website and look at the residencies that they've done and do some research into that. So there's a certain amount of research that goes into it, figuring out where it exists. Do you fall under, or do you fit into the qualifications of whether it's like most of the time you can't be in a degree seeking program. So if you're an undergrad or getting your MFA, there are some you might not be able to apply to if you're still going to be in that program. But from my experience, they all do a good job of like listing out the eligibility. So I would check into a few of those places and then just like actively working and creating and documenting. You could be creating all the work in the world, but if it's not documented for any application, it's not going to serve you in the way that it can. So like make the work, photograph the work, whether it's you, before I was able to afford a photographer to document my work, it was like clean wall, well lit, iPhone, editing on Photoshop. If that's something that's like also intimidating to you, you probably know a photographer. Artist trades are a thing. Like there's a couple different ways to go about getting an image of your work, whether it's you doing it, you paying someone to do it, or you and some artist friends getting together and say, hey, we've got this photographer or a friend who has a camera. Let's spend this like 4 hours helping each other shoot each other's work. And most of the time, I tell my friends this all the time, especially artist friends, like the majority of your work, and I'd argue maybe like 90% of the time your work is viewed as an image, not in person. Because like we are always on social media, websites, like the number of people who've seen that pink piece in person versus on an image, it's like the ratio is not equal. You know what I mean? It's not 40-60. It's probably definitely between 80-90% of people have seen an image. So like images are important. And I think taking the chance to apply for them. It's really easy to feel like you're never ready, so then you never apply and then you never get to do the residency. And I think that sometimes you just have to shoot your shot and see what happens, and not being afraid of the word no. It took me a while to learn that no doesn't mean I'm not good enough. It could mean so many other things, but like it's okay. On to the next opportunity. And I try not to get boggled down in like internalizing rejection because that's easy to do. I kind of look at it as like a not right now or not this time, and that's okay. Um, Hopefully that answers that question. I feel like I threw a lot out there.
You shared so many really amazing tidbits that are things that you aren't even thinking about. That's the importance of documenting your work being one of them, certainly. And yeah, that personal element around rejection and continuing to keep pursuing. I love that. In talking about residency opportunities, it reminded me that our guest on this next week's session of Open Doors, Alexis Shockley at VCU Arts and Healthcare is looking to open an artist residency at VCU Health. So Siani or anyone here, I'm not sure who's local and who's not, but that is a Richmond-based opportunity for a residency that comes to mind as well.
And
And
if I can just say, the Visual Arts Center of Richmond has a residency. 1708 is in their pilot residency, but I'm sure in the next year or so that'll probably be more open. Art 180 has a residency. Like, so there's a lot of local ones. And then outside of Richmond, I know the Virginia, oh, someone might have to correct me. It's VCCA, I think. I know it's a little further north. But there are plenty around us that don't require you to like leave the state or the region. Um, yeah, I just wanted to put that in there.
yeah, thank you. And I know you did the Children's Museum one too, didn't you? I think I saw some of your.
Yes, the Children's Museum. So like, and I don't want to jump into questions you haven't asked, but when I talked about, the number of residencies that exist, they're also not all the same. The Children's Museum was one where I went to that space and worked. No, Keisha, sorry, my dog is gonna pull my shirt. Um, that I went to that space and I worked, but I left, you know? So the difference between a residency where you're leaving your home and you're fully integrated into that community, and whether you're paying for lodging or lodging is uh, given to you, you know, you go and you live in the space and then you have a studio space and sometimes meals are offered. That's not every residency, and that's not the Children's Museum residency. So I would go, I think there were a certain amount of hours of expectations where I was supposed to be there working, obviously during the museum hours, because it was kind of community and youth based, where it was about the youth community there having access to me and the work that I was making that would be installed in the museum. Um, and then not all residencies are project based, where they're expecting you to spend a certain amount of time in the studio and create this work for any particular reason. The Wasaic project in New York that you mentioned in my bio, that was one where we didn't even have to be in the studio if we didn't want to. We had our own studio and you could be there, or you could go hiking or biking or just sit and read. So there are, depending on like what you need, there's probably a residency that exists for that particular need. And I think it's great that they're not all the same or the same duration. I've done a week residency, and then I've done 2 9-month residencies. The one in Doha, I think, is the only one that was overseas. Um, and I'm sure almost every state has artist residencies. And it's just really cool that um, there's so much diversity in what each one offers, because then you kind of get to tailor it to the time that you have. Not everyone can take a 9-month residency. Sometimes a week or 2 weeks is just you need just what you need to like have a break from your little fur baby that wants to keep pulling on you, or like, you know, you just need to get out of your norm for just a week to focus on this project or finish up this thing. And all those exist in those forms. So I think when I talked about like researching residencies, it's important to kind of, because like they're not all the same. You know, it's not like I can look at one and look at the other, and I don't have to look at all of them because they all give me a studio space and housing, and they're all going to feed us 3 times a day, which Vermont Studio does. Vermont Studio Center, they do feed you. Those are nice ones. But then like Mass Mocha doesn't. I think they offer lunch, and then you figured out the rest on your own. But and then, you know, with the 9-month residency I did with the can, I wasn't living there. I was living in Virginia Beach at the time, and I would travel to that space. So I had studio space, but I wasn't, lodging wasn't included. So there's so many of them out there that offer different things. And there are residencies that are child friendly and family friendly. I know Penland has, they offer residencies to folks with families and kids, and they'll accommodate the family. I think the WISAID project does as well. So like you could find residencies where you could bring your partner or your child or children with you, and they accommodate you in that way as well. Yeah.
What a perception. Hopefully you weren't having to cross the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel when you were going
Oh,
from.
I was, and that was why I got there in the morning and I stayed until after work traffic, and I packed my lunch and my dinner, and I was just like, I was there all day.
Oh gosh. Okay, so Mary, I'm looking at some more questions from the chat. Mary wanted to know, while we're talking about residencies, what do you think is the key to getting residencies and winning a place in a residency? Or a couple keys maybe. I think you've touched on it a little bit, you know, some things are for you, some things might not be for you, depending. Um,
Yeah, I think so. Something I didn't share. Well, so the documentation of work, like having a portfolio is important. Because I don't think I've ever applied to a residency where they didn't ask to see images of work. But I think something that comes to mind is um the not necessarily a project statement, but quite a few of them ask like why is this residency good for you at this time? What are you hoping to do here? Like those kinds of questions. And I think not just breezing through them and, you know, treating that question with a certain level of importance, because it is an opportunity to kind of like I don't know, make your case of like why you feel like this is a great opportunity for you at this time and why you're seeking it and why it's important. And I think that because I've never applied and judged my application, I can't say if that's the thing, but I do when I'm applying, I try to make sure I give that question some intentionality, and really sit through and try to make it make sense with the work I've made, the work I'm currently creating, and the work I think I might want to do. So it doesn't seem like, you know, I just want to go to Japan because I want to go to Japan. It's like, well, no, why do you want this residency at this place at this time, with this group? I think that's really important.
We just got a question about opportunities relevant to international artists. I don't know if you're able to see this one in the chat, Nastassja, but it reminded me of your partner, whose name is escaping me, that you just did the Atlas residency with. Um,
Hmm.
is Art 180's residency open to international artists?
So I think that that is the direction it's going to be moving in. And my response to this question is not like, this is the answer because I don't want to speak for them, but I know that that was the first artist that was internationally based that they were able to welcome over. And I know that that's a direction they've been hoping to be able to go in. So I know that it won't be the last. Whether they're opening up their application portal to national and international artists, I'm not sure, but I know that they want to be able to like operate in a way where they can welcome an international artist.
Yeah, Zita, for context, Nastassja just completed a residency at Art 180, which is a group based here, where CultureWorks is based, and the community we primarily serve is those who live in Richmond, Virginia, and in the Tri-Cities region in Virginia. But Art 180 is an organization in Richmond, and Nastassja's partner was an artist based in South Africa, from South Africa, and traveled over here for the residency. So that is a specific opportunity that exists.
But I do, now that I look at the question, I think I can answer a little bit more. So I think that there are residencies that exist all over the world, not just in the United States. So I think applying for residencies in the United States versus like applying for residencies in Spain or Europe, like or not Europe, Spain or the UK or wherever, um, that gets like and in one way, it's kind of like these are artistic opportunities that ask for a portfolio or a statement or a CV, and there's a certain amount of like baseline expectations for applying. And then beyond that, there's like logistics of residency permits and travel. Like that's where things I think get very specific to the locality of where that residency is, which isn't something I can necessarily speak to. I've had experience in with going to VCU's other campus where there was this whole kind of like process around permits and passports and like how long I'm going to be here. I'm not just visiting, 9 months I'm living here. So I'm a resident and a driver's license. Like all of those things are specific to the place and in ways specific to the residency, but there are residencies that exist all over the world. So you could apply to a residency in Peru or I know that a friend of mine was doing one in Spain. So like that page that I mentioned, Artist Alliance on Instagram, or like a lot of those places that post on Instagram also have a blog where you can kind of like look at all the different opportunities. Um, that is a big part of the research aspect of finding the right residency and like kind of digging into, okay, now if I'm not going to one in my home country or home city, these are all the things I have to think about before or during the application process for that. So it's definitely possible, and I think that yeah, it just requires some research. I don't think there's any way to get out of it.
Oh,
But they exist. They exist.
yeah, finding that artist, like you said, going to their site, looking at their CV, looking at who's doing what, and finding, understanding. This is what I've received. Correct me if I'm wrong, but understanding that maybe not everything is for you and like your work and your project, and a no isn't necessarily indicative of your talent or your work. It just might not be a good fit, and not right now, like you said.
Yeah,
Um,
I have applied for Kehinde Wiley's Blackrock Senegal residency every year since it started, and I have yet to do it. And I'll keep applying, and because it's free to, and that's a thing too. So that hasn't come up are application fees. And sometimes that can be like a factor in whether someone applies to one for not. There's a Japan-based residency that was started by a curator. Um, that's a $95 application fee. I've paid it once, and if you don't get in the first year, your fee will roll over to a second year of applications, and you can apply again for free. But, am I in a rush to pay another $95 to apply again now that I haven't, I've gotten two no's? I don't know. So like that's something to take into consideration, if you're putting in applications every month, that becomes a budget item sometimes. Luckily, CultureWorks, thank you guys, does not have an application fee, but a lot of them do, and for different reasons. And I get it, but it's definitely something you have to think about, before you say, I'm going to sit down and apply to 100 things today, if all of them have 25 and up dollar application fees. Um, but, for the ones that don't, if I don't get it, I'm like, okay, cool. I'll apply again. It wasn't too much of an ask, especially if, there are really complex applications. And then there are like some pretty straightforward, there's a certain amount of work you're going to put in, but it's not going to take you kind of an obscene amount of time where you're like, oh my God, I can't go through that process again. Those are the ones where I'm like, yeah, I'll just keep applying and we'll see what happens. But that is in Senegal, which is from where I'm living, an internationally based residency that I would be applying to, as well as the one in Japan. So I think those are the only two that I can think of right now. That are not in the states that I've applied to. And I know there are far more out there that exist.
Yeah, I didn't realize that some of them cost money. That was new for me
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
to keep in mind at the end of the day. And again, like you've been talking about researching and knowing, depending on your circumstances, maybe compiling that list of free to apply to opportunities for oneself. Um,
And then, so sorry, I keep like, because things are coming to mind as we're talking about that. So through from the point of application fees, I know, especially since after the pandemic, there have been a lot of organizations that have offered application waivers. Um, I think more times than not, they'll say something like, if you need, for whatever reason, or if your circumstances call for the application being waived, send an email here, and I'm assuming they'll waive it for you. I don't know if there's a conversation that takes place, but I know that a lot of them offer that now, as well as residency cost. So some of them are free, some of them are not. And then there are those that are not free, but then you can apply for a scholarship or they give awards. So technically, so Penland, people pay to go and do that residency, but because I was invited as a distinguished fellow, it was offered to me for free. And then there's Wasaic Project, I think they offer like pay as you can, like this is what they would normally charge, but what can you offer towards that? So there are residencies like those that exist, and then there are some that are kind of like scholarship based where you can apply for this residency. And I know VCCA has like merit-based scholarships or opportunities for you to cover the cost of the residency. So there's that part of it as well. Hopefully I spoke to that well enough where it's helpful for anyone jumping into researching residencies and figuring out the ones that cost versus don't, and like opportunities of support within specifically applying to those.
Yeah, I think so. We have about 10 minutes left. That's mainly for me because I am like so tuned in. I just want to keep picking your brain about stuff. I'm learning so much. But Siani, excuse me, asked, how do you balance practicing your art, finding and applying to grants while maintaining everyday life? Has this been challenging or has it forced you to be disciplined?
Um, a little of both. I think it's challenging and it forces me to look at my time. I currently work as a full-time artist, so I'm not uh, balancing my art and writing or applying and another job. But it still becomes challenging because I want to be creating and then I have to like force myself to pause and respond to these questions in a very thoughtful way. I try my best not to apply to anything at the last minute because I can't work that way. My brain doesn't think fully in that way. And I think earlier this year, I spent maybe like a month of maybe 75% of my time being writing about things and applying to grants and fellowships and residencies. So I think the best advice I can offer is to try to organize your time in a way, which sounds easier said than done. I feel like we're all talking about organizing our time, but to really say, okay, what are the upcoming applications that are due this month? So I think if you can start there, then it's not this like frenzy of like, oh no, this is due in a week or tomorrow and I have to get a letter of recommendation. I think if you could try to like schedule them out, I'll put them on my calendar. CultureWorks is due this month, such and such is due this month. So that way, maybe I'm not focusing on the application that's 2 months away or 6 months away, but I'm looking at the one for that month. And I just try to carve out a couple sessions the weeks prior to get those worked on. And that's helped because then even if I'm submitting on the same day, I've already gone through like writing, editing, someone else reading, rewriting. I feel really good about hitting submit. And it's like, it's above me now. I can't do anything about what happens, but I feel good about what I submitted. And I think, if you can schedule it out in that way, the same way you'd schedule a Zoom call or anything else, like put it on the calendar. Maybe you put a 2-week check-in, like, okay, I know this is due at the end of the month. I'm going to put something else 2 weeks prior so I can check in with myself. Have I even started this yet? Because now 2 weeks has gone by and it's due in another two. That's been really helpful for me. And I guess that goes into being disciplined. I have to, mark it down for myself.
Yeah, and to echo something you shared earlier, I think like you shared, having things documented and having your artist statement, project descriptions, some of those things ready to go and already made, sets yourself up for success, it sounds like.
Yes, Google Docs is my best friend. I work on all of my applications on Google Docs so that way when anything else comes up, I'm like, okay, this question looks really familiar to a question that I was asked for this fellowship or this award. Can I pull certain chunks out of this? And I don't know if that sounds like cheating. I don't think it is. I think it's like working smarter. But I mean, I've already answered the question. I just answered it more specifically over here. But I want to say similar things. I don't need to start from scratch and find the words to make this make sense. I'll pull chunks of this out and put it over here, and then I can tailor it to this opportunity. But then I'm starting here and not here. And that is a game changer. So I try to keep my CV updated. I try to update my bio. When I finish a work within the next week, I'm getting it photographed, even if they're not going anywhere. I've got the images and I'm not trying to track down a photographer with their busy schedule to document my work. I have all the images backed up a number of places. So I definitely document organization is important as well. And I try to stay on myself about that.
Yeah. Um, Lastly, and I'll invite anybody else with these last 5 minutes, if anybody has any lingering questions they would like to ask, now is definitely the time. But we've been obviously talking, it seems like residencies really filled up a lot of the conversation today, but grants and residencies, I'm wondering if there's anything outside of those resources that you have found to be a valuable resource, whether that's taking classes or learning about marketing or business. Is there anything outside of residencies and grants that's helped you as an artist and or has helped you in support of those grants and residencies? Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And there's a couple of answers to them. I think the biggest one is that we as artists can be each other's best and biggest resource. I don't think we talk to each other enough. And I say that to anyone who listens. I think that we should talk to each other so much more about things we're doing, things we're interested in, things we're struggling with. So many of us are going through this like similar lives almost or creative journeys, and we're bumping into the same obstacles, and we're not looking side by side to say, oh hey, you're bumping into the same rock that I am, like, or you already bumped into this rock, how did you get over it or around it? So I think talking to the artist around you in or in your network more often, if you don't have a network of artists, putting yourself in spaces where you can meet other artists and talk to them, and whether it's sending a message on Instagram or going to an opening. I met someone who lives around Petersburg at a mural block party Friday, and someone else was like, oh, you guys know each other, and I was like, no, we just met, and she stood next to me, so I talked to her, and now we both know we're artists, and she's joining my book club. And like creating community with each other is probably like the biggest asset that we have in terms of offering each other resources. Because all these things I just listed, if you ask me, I can tell you, and now you have someone who knows which Instagram page to look up residencies or which grants are due. I don't do photography, but I know of a lot of photography-based opportunities, and I send them out to my friends. I'm like, hey, this doesn't apply to me, but you were just telling me you were trying to find something like this. You've got 3 weeks before the application. So I think communicating with each other is resource number one. Something more logistical that's been super helpful for me is reaching out to an attorney that works with artists. And that sounds really specific because it is, but like, there was a point where I was trying to create a licensing agreement myself, and I realized like why, when there are people who um, have gone to school and have the knowledge to craft this kind of document and what's needed in it. So I like contracts and agreements, I've stopped trying to Google construct myself, and I'm just like, cool, this is something I have to pay for. Got it. Like this, I chose to enter into this line of work. I wanted art to be my full-time profession, and there are like things that go along with that I'm not skilled or knowledgeable in, and that's okay. So like realizing that like talking to an accountant might be important as well. Like how do I file my taxes versus someone else who isn't a full-time artist and self-employed? So I think some of those like really specific really under like the frame of business that because that's what we are as artists, we're small businesses, and realizing that so that way you can like approach situations accordingly. um and that is what's coming to mind. Yeah, accountant, attorney, friends.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. I have been having so much fun, and you are just so engaging and inspiring to listen to. Thank you for sharing that, all your little tidbits and your insights with us. I want to give you an opportunity if you have anything exciting coming up you want to plug, or anything we should be looking out for from you.
Yes. Ooh, I wasn't prepared with something. Okay. Well, you and I talked about it, but my dolls are now sold at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. So that is super exciting. If you ever find yourself in DC, go and of course see the museum, but stop at the museum shop and look at the dolls. And I'm going to be starting a residency with Studio 23. Oh, I'm giving a research presentation February 6th, 2025. The residency I'm doing with Studio 23 is a part of the work being produced through a larger research project. So that was the Center for Craft Research Fellowship. I spent most of the year researching about my research topic. I'll produce 6 life-size sculptures, but that will be pretty much all year. So in the interim, I'm doing some printmaking projects that'll support that work. And then I get to present my research at the ICA in partnership with VCU. So if you're around in February, I'm sure I will give that information to you so it can be shared more officially. But yes, that is a very exciting thing.
Congratulations. All of that is wonderful. And thank you again for coming and talking to us today and sharing everything that you did. And thank you to those of you who joined us on the call today. I hope that some of you gleaned something like I sure did. And like I said, we have 2 more of these this month. These have been really awesome. I've really enjoyed the ones we've had so far, and I really look forward to our next 2 coming up later in the month. And you can stay up to date with things going on with CultureWorks and Artober at CultureWorks RVA. I'll put that in the chat, and at artoberVA. And thank you guys for your time. I hope to see you all soon. And thank you, Nastassja. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you guys for being here.
Bye.